Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Sachin Karnik here. Welcome to the continuing presentations and then subsequent exploratory conversation dialogue on the religious studies and the religions of the world. I want to offer my respects to all of you who are online, as well as to all the great teachers throughout the world. May they all be blessed. May we gain wisdom from them all with that good feeling and with that good intention. We're progressing here. Today is the 20th, I believe, 20th of February 2025. I want to begin today with just a commentary on this entire notion of good versus evil. This is going to be just my commentary for the next 10, 15 minutes or so. And then I want to cover one more piece, to try to cover only two major points each time. All right. Okay. So what I'm going to talk now is simply Sachin's commentary. That's all it is. All right. So having to make that very clear. In my humble analysis and perspective over many, many years of this question of good versus evil, the dualities of life, the polarities of life, the dualities of life that we experience. This is in our experience. The Genesis piece that we have been looking at, and then is there in the Gita and other places about the dualities of life. Even if it wasn't there in those scriptures, this is in our observation. Even if you leave all the scriptures on the side, and even if we leave them on the side and just observe, just see what is the nature of life, what do we see? We see that there is young age, and there's middle age, and there's old age, and there's birth, and there's death. There is happiness and distress, and there is the praise and blame in life. There is all kinds of pleasures. There's all kinds of pains. We find this on a continuum. We have some very strong emotions, it's called emotional valence. They shift in many different ways. Even if all the scriptures of the world were not there, we would still see all of this, right? So in our perception, what do we have? We have the experience of life. And when we actually have the Vedanta retreat at my home, we're going to start with this point, actually, just exactly at this point, the experience of life. And we'll go from there when you guys come here. But the point is that the good versus evil, when we use those words, why those words? There's even a history of those words. Without going into the in-depth entomology and the linguistic history, we have the experience of what is good. In our everyday language, we say this is a good person. This is a good situation. This is a good conversation. There is goodness. There is the notion of goodness. If you were to draw a parallel word in the Eastern traditions, that is called sattva, S-A-T-T-V-A. Sattva means goodness, modality of goodness, a state of mind that is good. Then when we say evil, now this word is a loaded word, because this is difficult to wrap our heads around what this might be. What is meant by evil? How is it understood historically? How is it understood by us today? Again, that's, we need 7, 8, 10 hours just to answer that question. But we don't have that much time, so just share with you some of my thoughts on this one. That, again, it's experience. It's the experience of life. For example, someone hurting another, like the 10 Commandments say, thou shalt not murder. That's the commandment, let's say. Don't kill another human being. Why is that? That's considered to be an evil act or as an affront against God. Why? Well, because there's something in us that stirs when we see another person hurt. Even if you leave the scriptures on the side for the time being, when we see another person suffering, we also begin to suffer. For the most part, not always. And it's not the same level of suffering, but we feel it. It happens even just when you're watching a TV show or a movie. There's a real sad scene or real emotional scene, and we start to experience those emotions. We're just watching something that actors are playing out, and still we experience those certain emotions, sometimes strong emotions. Why? Why does that even happen? And this is the perspective of many religious traditions, that morality is inbuilt, and particularly in the Abrahamic traditions, It is given by God. It is built inside our system, the genetic system, the epigenetic system, the neurological system, the structure of the world itself. It is built into us. It has been placed there by the Lord, by God. This is the Judeo-Christian and even Islamic perspective, as far as I know. Now it's very interesting. There are, of course, many perspectives. I don't want to go into all of them. But if that's the case, then that also brings us back to things like Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher who talked about what is called categorical imperative. It's a type of ethics that is non-relative ethics, that it's never okay to hurt another human being. But then you might say, well, hold on a minute. What about when there's evil going on and you don't have a choice? So you put some conditions on that. Okay, so there is a conditional ethics. So ethics morality has a wellspring from some source. What is that source? Is that God? Is it some authority? It is the biblical tradition. Is it a great sage? Is it some great evolved enlightened being? What is the source of morality and ethics? Is it actually inbuilt inside of us and we just have to discover it? Is it coming just from tradition and culture and conditioning? Many perspectives. Is ethics morality, the good versus the evil, is that purely relative? Relativistic ethics, like what the society believes at that time, then children are brought up in that is considered to be the right thing to do because of the predominant belief in the culture at that time. Many examples. You see, or is it really ethics, morality, what ought to be done, what ought not to be done, or what is good versus evil? Let's just stay with that. What is the good versus evil? And then everything in between. It's a continuum. Is that inbuilt inside of us naturally, that it is universal? It is not a matter of relativistic perspective? These are the questions. Now, as we have been examining the Old Testament, the Old Testament's perspective, and then all the scholars that have come after that, Hebrew scholars, Jewish scholars, Christian scholars, as well as the theologians and mystics, I think that they would all say in both of those traditions that this is an edict from God. God has placed that inside the mind. But then, hold on, let's back up for a moment. What about the forbidden tree? The forbidden tree was forbidden. That means that you don't touch that, you don't eat that fruit. This is the knowledge of good and evil. This is the knowledge of good and evil is born from eating that tree. From eating the fruit of that tree. Very interesting. So then what was there before that? Before eating that, even if it's an allegory, if it's some kind of a symbol, whatever it may be, is there a state, and this is the question that I'm proposing here, and I'll just share some of my thoughts on this one, that is there a state beyond good and evil, beyond all dualities? Now that might sound very nice. In the Sanskrit language, this is called dvanda, D-W-A-N-D-A or D-V-A-N-D-A. Dvanda means duality. There's all kinds of duality. Everything is within the realm of duality. The seasons are moving, they're changing constantly. They're extremes of all kinds. All of nature is within that. Our own body is within that. Our emotions are within that. So if we're saying there is something, some state or some truth with a capital T that is beyond duality, beyond the good and the evil, what can that be? What is that? And assuming it is there, how do we access it? So now that brings us to spiritual/religious/meditation practices. In every tradition of the world, practices are done to try to access that dimension beyond the polarity of good versus evil. Even to understand that polarity is a big thing. Because, it's said quite a bit in the Christian tradition, God is good. Well, but God, in my humble interpretation, God is beyond good. If you put God inside, if you say God is good, then he's in that fallen state of good versus evil. He has a knowledge of good and evil as far as the Bible goes, but he's not trapped in that. So that means whatever that reality is, has to be transcendent to what is good. Now, we say God is good because that is our mind saying that. But it would have to be something transcendent to time, transcendent to causality, transcendent to polarity, transcendent to duality. And that is the real question. If we say that there is a truth or the divine that is beyond everything, the mystery, the transcendent, all right, how do we access it? What do we need to access it? And that is what the mystical traditions, mystical simply means we are trying to touch. In the history of humanity, those who are called mystics are those individuals who have tried to touch the divinity, not simply have faith in the divinity. So in Sachin's humble opinion here, or perspective, that there's reason at one level, beyond that is faith, beyond that is a dimension where faith culminates to its highest levels, and that which we are having faith in actually is revealed, actually is touched. That is, and you can use the word experience, but it may not be a sensory experience. It is a spiritual touching of the reality itself. And that's what the mystics are after. In every tradition of the world, they actually want to touch that. And that's where meditation comes into the picture. So for example, let's just take the example in Christianity with Jesus. I can say that I believe in Jesus. He's my Lord. I believe in him, and I believe in the New Testament, and go to church and do good works and try to live a good Christian, holy life. That's all fine. Okay, but then what? I mean, what's next? Let's say a person is doing all that. Is that enough? So many would say, well, that's it. You've done all that. When the time comes, God will take you with, when the time comes to go to heaven, and that's the end of it. So many would say that kind of thing. Just keep doing what you're doing, and that's all. But there's others who would say, no, that's not good enough for us. We want to actually, we want to see God. We want to see God face to face. That's a whole different question. This is true in the Jewish mysticism, Christian, Islamic mysticism, Eastern traditions also. The attempt to see the divine. How is that possible? What could that possibly be even? So this is very interesting. Let's take just the New Testament as an example. Very easy to understand. Let's say a person starts studying the New Testament and really goes into it. Whichever denomination, Christianity, maybe non-denominational, or like Unity Church, or some Unitarian, or some universal perspective, whatever it may be, or it could be a particular denomination, Protestantism, Catholicism, Quakerism, etc. Whatever it is, a person goes deeper and deeper into it, to the point where there is an enhanced connection with the object of devotion. The object, meaning that it's not an object, with the personality of Jesus in this case, the chosen deity. So there's more and more connection. It's not simply just having a rudimentary faith. It's much, much more than that. Much, much more. And people in every tradition are like that. In Christianity, you'll find monks. You'll find the monks at Mount Athos. You'll find individuals in all denominations that are very deep into the denomination. They're like really deep into it, and people look up to them and they give sermons or teachings and things like that, right? Okay, so let's say a person has gone to that depth. All right. Does it mean that just by going to an extreme depth in contemplation and prayer and meditative reflection and things like that, that God is going to appear to us as the result of our practices? Is God the result of human practice? In the Hindu tradition, this is called sadhana, sadhana. It's an interesting word. And when you guys come here to see my place, I'll be introducing to a lot of Sanskrit terminology. Really cool stuff. Really cool, very interesting. The word sadhana simply means practice. You are practicing, you are applying the principles and ideals and ideas and things like that to reach that divine state. But the question becomes, is it so that a person takes 99 steps in a Christian tradition, and then they take the final step, and then God has to appear? Is it some kind of a cause-effect relationship that a person takes all these steps, and then now God appears without any doubt? Is that how it works? Is God performance-based. So here's another distinction for your notes. In Christianity, and even in Judaism, both traditions make a distinction between, as far as I know, they make a distinction between performance-based salvation versus grace-based salvation. So the study of salvation, I believe, is called soteriology, Seriotology. That's the technical word for it. It's the doctrine of salvation. How does salvation occur? Salvation from what? From the fall, from this pain and suffering and the dualities, polarities, things like that. That's called the doctrine, the way that salvation happens. So there's two major opinions on this. One is performance-based, that you have to try to live 100% the best religious life you can live. Do your best, absolutely. And if you are 100%, as much as you can be, God has to come in because you have done so much, God comes to you. This is called performance-based salvation. The other approach, the other theory, is grace-based salvation. Grace-based salvation is what? God is only seeing your sincerity. He knows you're imperfect. There's sin, there's fall, there's deficiency. You cannot get rid of it completely. You have to accept God, surrender to Him, accept Jesus, things like that. And then by total surrender and giving oneself over to Him, grace dawns. God removes the barriers, like the cherubim that we were talking about, those barriers that have been placed into the Garden of Eden. He removes all those deficiencies. He removes all the barriers. And then so the cause of salvation is the grace of God. This is called grace-based salvation. I hope these points are really clear. There are, like even in the Indian tradition, both of these concepts are there. They're absolutely there. And there are those who believe that, that you keep evolving and keep growing, and then ignorance goes away, and, all that kind of deficiency goes away. And the reality, the vast, infinite reality opens up. The divine opens up, and that's what you are also part of that. And, so this is some kind of a performance-based practice. But it's very interesting. Those who are practicing a dualistic form of worship, they all believe in grace-based salvation, whether it's in the East or the West. It doesn't matter if it's in the East, it's both. And the word for that in the Sanskrit language is called krupa, K-R-U-P-A. It means exactly grace. If you were to translate that, there are exact words that translate, like 99%, they have the same meaning. The word is krupa, K-R-U-P-A. And by the way, the word Krupalu, the Dr. Krupalu, right? There's the word right there. Krupalu means one who has grace, one who is graceful. Krupa. The word Krupa means benediction, grace. That is coming, that is flowing from the divine. That is called Krupa. You see? It's a very common word in almost all the Indian languages. It simply means grace. See the word faith. The word for faith, or rely with intense faith, latching on to, that is called Shraddha, Shraddha. Same concept. That is called Shraddha. You see, so this thing about performance. There's other words for that. They're a little bit more complicated. I won't go into them. But the performance, you're making effort. That is called Purusharth. That's another. Don't worry about remembering that. There's parallel words. Parallel concepts. Why is that? Because we are all human beings. That's why. The traditions may vary, but our internal propensity towards spirituality, towards higher realization, our emotional world, our intellectual world, even though the content varies, the nature of it is fundamentally the same. It's not all that different as we might think it is. Hunger is hunger. Thirst is thirst. It doesn't matter what language somebody speaks, what religious belief they might have, or they might not have any religious belief or political belief. If somebody is very thirsty, thirst, is beyond all of these divisions. Hunger is beyond all of these divisions that we have created. The traditions and divisions. It's hunger, thirst, infatuation, the sexual drives, the procreation drives, all those things are universal. They have nothing to do with being siloed into one particular group of people. And because they are universal, even what we are calling the religious traditions of the world that have sprung out throughout the whole world, it is very possible that they have emitted from the same innate three questions, which we'll talk about when you guys come here. Who am I? What is the nature of this world? Where did this world come from? And is there a cause of all causes, which doesn't have a cause? Where's a supreme cause that doesn't have a cause? These are the three basic questions. Where did this world come from? What is the nature of this world? And who am I? Three basic questions. And if you just stay with those three questions, the thousands of traditions that have come about, they have come out of these three. They have come out of these three. Because we have the capacity to question. We have curiosity. We're not just a programmed machine that is functioning within a program pattern and has no free agency to question, to probe, to ask. We're not like that. Now, traditions develop, like, for example, like take the example of Moses. He wrote these 5 books, or they were revealed to him. He says they were revealed to him. Even in his own time, people question that. What do you mean they were revealed to you? How do you just wrote something down and you want to become king over us? You want to control us. Even people say that today. How do you know what is revealed? Again, those are more complicated questions. But the fact of the matter is that when there is a society where children are born dependent, there has to be some structure in place for civilization to transmit its knowledge, its practices to the next generation. So that's a more psychological theory about where these traditions came from. That all of these people, whether it's Moses or the prophets of the Old Testament or the great leaders in India, the great teachers, spiritual sages, or the incarnations, all of these people, they set these patterns and beliefs so that the society can follow a particular pattern that they feel is the right pattern. So this is a sociological, more psychological and sociological answer to the development of religious traditions. And so many of these people in the academia who are sociologists, like who study religions, many of them, you can see the research articles also, they will say there's no God or anything like that. This is just a human-made phenomena, to put patterns into the world, to mold behavior in a certain way. But is that so? Is that what it is? Or truly there's something beyond all of that? People who are deeply devoted to Jesus, let's say, or deeply devoted to Krishna, or if you see some of these people, they are deep into their devotion and they have experiences, transcendental experiences. Where do they come from? What is it? That's the mystery. You see, so transcendental experiences that happen, are they happening because they are actually tapping into some transcendental dimension? Or is it simply just a delusion, as some people have stated? You see, so again, without complicating this issue, keep in mind that there is the development of a tradition. There's no question about that. I think if you were to simplify this discussion, children are always brought up in some tradition. They're brought up in a language, in a culture, in a belief system, in a societal structure. Every child is. That's what makes the child human. If you take that away, and there's no conditioning of any kind, it's a blank. There's no humanity. There's a book actually which I've referenced before called The Forbidden Experiment, where a child was raised in the jungle up to age 16. The researchers found that child. They could not bring that child back into human civilization. They tried to educate and everything. The child was pretty much living like an animal. Survived somehow in the wilderness. So the acquisition of language, the development of the brain, the maturation of the brain, all of this is based on culture, tradition, family norms, values, ethics, things like that. I mean, most religious traditions believe that their children should follow the tradition that they're following, right? So it doesn't matter. Like in the Islam tradition, kids are taught to memorize the Quran. Quite a few number of people have the Quran memorized right from childhood. You see, it's like that. In many of the Christian traditions, you'll see very religious households. They have Bible study. They memorize verses of the Bible. They said we want to instill values, traditions. We want to instill a belief that we have into our kids. This is a common expression that is used. This is actually called sanskara, sanskara, in the Hindu tradition. Sanskara, meaning impressions. So all of these factors are at play. All of these factors are at play. You see, if you were to take a person and just remove that person from human civilization, well, did somebody try that? Sure. That is Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau, he took 2 years out of his life, built a log cabin somewhere in Massachusetts, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and he removed himself from human civilization, had a bunch of books with him, I think he had kept enough food somehow. I'm not sure where he got all the food for 2 years, but he kept it. He had no contact with any human being. He was in nature for 2 years. And then he wrote Walden 1, Walden 2, the two very, very famous books. And a lot of insights. I'll stop in just a moment here. So he removed himself from human civilization. I don't know how old he was, but he was a grown-up individual. And these are very famous books. He's one of the famous American transcendentalists. There's Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. These two fellows are very famous transcendentalists, American transcendentalists. So what were they trying to do? What was their vision? Their vision was to try to break out of the society's conditioning. They didn't want to associate with any particular religious tradition, but they pulled a lot of ideas together. They wanted to just be in nature. They wanted to contemplate what the traditions are saying, but they didn't want to be influenced by human society in their own way. Of course, they were, no doubt, but they wanted to try to evolve out of that. This is in some of the works written by Emerson, like Self-Reliance, is a very famous essay. Well, when you come to my place, I'll show it to you. Self-Reliance. It's a small, tiny little booklet, You can find it online. It's free. Just type in Self-Reliance PDF. You'll find it, so many copies of that. And if you go through it, you'll see how extraordinary it is when a person asserts their own independence of all of this societal background and conditioning. Not disrespecting all those traditions, but at the same time saying, this is too small. And again, I'm not talking about myself here. I'm just, I kind of went through that journey myself. You can see the limitations, but it's not easy. It's very difficult to see the limitations of any tradition. And sometimes people do that in a very egotistical and critical manner. And humbly, Sachin would refrain from, I would never want to do that. Absolutely. I personally would not want to do that. To be critical and to be criticizing others. But nonetheless, there is a possibility of seeing the boundary of a tradition. And then all those people within that boundary are in that boundary, and maybe that works well for them, and that's fine. That's that. But there are some rare jewels or gems that cannot deal with that boundary. They cannot stay in that boundary. And again, that's just my commentary on this. I'm calling them gems and jewels simply because, you can have lots of people and millions of people are in all kinds of traditions, but very few have the tenacity to rise above that and get a bird's eye view. Very difficult. It's not easy. If you're in the tradition, it's extremely difficult to rise above it internally while still respecting it or even remaining in it. To remain in it, but to rise above its boundary. And that's this is one of the ideas we'll talk about when you all come here. When we talk about Vedanta and all that. So these are difficult things. Now it is 7:31. I don't want to, as I mentioned before, I don't want to overcomplicate this. I never got to the second point I was going to make today, so leave that alone for another time. But this is good enough for now. Lots of interesting ideas, lots of perspectives about the dualities, the polarities, what is divinity, what could be potentially beyond that, grace-based salvation, performance-based salvation, the doctrine of salvation, the nature of the fallen nature of man, which is called sin. And the word sin, if it originally means to miss the mark, that you've missed the mark. So there's a lot of ways to understand the concept of sin, which we will talk about We'll talk about that in subsequent weeks. I haven't not even touched that subject yet, really. Right. So I just wanted to kind of just do a little bit of a recap as to where we are, give each of you an opportunity to reflect on this. Just one final comment before I close my recording here. My humble request to all of you online, as well as to anybody else listening to this later on YouTube, is to be patient, is to take these ideas slowly. These are very intricate and difficult concepts. Some people have been contemplating on these for years, and some people have just started this kind of contemplation. Go slow. Don't come to any quick conclusion. That's my humble request. Try to keep the mind open. Our tendency as human beings is to jump to conclusions right away. And it's pull back a little bit. Go slow. Come to conclusions in time, but with good information, good justification, good study, and take some time with it. Right? That is my prayer and request, and lots of good wishes for all. And I just ask for blessings from our whole community, as well as from from all the enlightened beings, whatever that may mean, who have come in the world. With that, I'll stop my exposition here. Would love to hear from all of you.